survival challenge.
Hello, welcome to my channel. I'm Jack, a YouTuber specializing in solo survival adventures in the deep forest. Today, we're starting a 7-day survival challenge in this tropical rainforest. With many challenges ahead, come join me.
The recording ended, and I began my work. That day, the sky was overcast with dark clouds hanging heavily as if ready to unleash their fury on the earth. The rain started early in the morning, with each drop pounding the ground and creating small puddles. Thunder roared across the sky, daring anyone brave enough to enter the deep forest in such weather. But these were the moments my channel thrived on. My viewers loved the rain-soaked scenes, relishing the sight of me confronting harsh challenges. With my camera in hand and full of determination, I stepped into the forest, searching for the perfect spot to set up camp. My heart pounded in my chest, a mix of excitement and nervousness. I knew that even the smallest mistake could lead to danger, but it was this very danger that made me feel more alive than ever. I had prepared thoroughly, bringing a machete to chop bamboo and basic tools to build a tent from materials found in the forest, adding a touch of authenticity to my video. In the pouring rain, setting up the tent alone was incredibly tough. I found a dense bamboo thicket and started chopping down small bamboo stalks to build the tent frame. The cold rain soaked through my clothes, making me shiver. Every time I chopped a bamboo stalk, I made sure the camera captured every detail so my audience could see the natural building process. After gathering enough bamboo, I began constructing the frame, tightly binding the bamboo poles together with vines I found in the forest. Raindrops pattered on the makeshift bamboo tent, each step of the setup becoming more challenging as the rain intensified. I carefully tied the corners of the tent, ensuring everything was secure and stable. But suddenly, a loud noise came from above. I looked up, and in an instant, a large, rotten branch fell, hitting me squarely on the head. Pain exploded in my skull, and everything went black. When I regained consciousness, my head throbbed with pain, and the icy rain on my face made me shiver uncontrollably. My entire body was shaking, each raindrop like a needle pricking my skin, soaking me to the bone in the freezing cold. I struggled to crawl into the tent to check my phone, but when I turned it on, I saw there was no signal. Panic started to rise, my chest tightening with fear. I lay still for a moment, trying to breathe evenly to ease the pain, but my mind couldn't stop fearing that I might die here, alone in this cold, desolate forest. The fear of death began to take over my thoughts. I wondered how long I had been unconscious in the rain, my body losing too much heat and strength. I tried to sit up, but the pain in my head spread through my body, each movement making me feel like I might collapse. I looked around the tent, the darkness and rain outside seeming to swallow all hope. I knew I couldn't stay here any longer. The cold and the fear of freezing to death forced me to act. With what little strength I had left, I crawled out of the tent, heading toward the main road. Every step was a struggle, my legs feeling like they were frozen, pain and exhaustion overwhelming me. The steady rain and thunder made the scene even more ominous and terrifying. I kept moving, my breath ragged, each cold raindrop making my body more numb. In my mind, I had one thought. I had to find help before it was too late. Each step seemed to bring me closer to despair, but I couldn't give up. I tried to recall happy memories, thinking of my loved ones waiting for me to come home, to give me the strength to keep going. I continued to crawl, hoping to find someone who would save me from this nightmare. When I finally reached the main road, the dizziness and exhaustion overwhelmed me. I collapsed on the road, my vision fading, and once again, I slipped into darkness. When I opened my eyes, I found myself in a bright white room, soft light filtering in. I realized I was in a hospital. A nurse approached, smiling gently.
"You're awake. How are you feeling?"
She asked.
Where am I?
I stammered, trying to sit up but feeling a sharp pain in my head.
"You're in a hospital. Someone found you lying on the road and brought you here. You were pretty badly injured, but fortunately nothing too serious,"
the nurse explained. Hearing this, I felt relieved but also worried. Who found me? Why did they help me? I looked around the room, trying to recall everything that had happened. The nurse continued.
"You should rest a bit more. The police will come by to get your statement about what happened."
I lay back down, closing my eyes, feeling the fatigue spread through my body. Although there were still many unanswered questions, I knew I had escaped a dangerous situation thanks to the help of a stranger. From now on, I had to be more careful in my future trips because real dangers often come from the most unexpected places. Forest rangers. What's the most terrifying story everyone has ever encountered in the woods? There was a time when I worked as an area control officer in a wild reserve. Throughout my career, I had to cooperate with various forest rangers quite often. Most of the time, we were assigned to patrol specific areas, removing illegal cameras, animal traps, and similar contraptions. Usually, each shift consisted of just two people, me and another ranger. One day, while on patrol, my colleague mentioned that he wasn't feeling well. We took a break, but he didn't seem to improve, so I decided to continue patrolling alone and let him return early. I let him leave first because it would take nearly an hour of off-road driving to get back to the headquarters from our location. While I was busy clearing traps and cameras, suddenly a deep, raspy voice spoke up from somewhere around me. Given my position, far off the trail and surrounded by trees, it was difficult to pinpoint where the voice came from. I called out firmly, asking if anyone was nearby, but there was no response. It felt as though I was being tricked by nature itself. By this time, it was getting dark, so I decided to head back to my off-road vehicle and prepare to return to headquarters. However, when I tried to start the engine, nothing happened. Panic set in. Alone in the vast forest with a broken vehicle and the nearest trail 3 kilometers away, it felt like a scene from a suspenseful movie. Trying to calm myself, I checked the vehicle and discovered that the cable connecting the battery had been disconnected. I tried not to think about how or who might have done this. My priority was to fix the problem and get out of that eerie place. I reattached the cable and tried starting the engine again. Surprisingly, it worked, but the vehicle ran irregularly. After less than a kilometer, it stalled completely with no power at all. Fortunately, I had moved out of the signal dead zone and could use my walkie-talkie again. I contacted headquarters and requested urgent assistance. Within moments, they responded, but said it would take nearly an hour to reach my location. I remembered my colleague who had returned earlier and asked if he had arrived, but they said they hadn't seen him yet. Strange. Nightfall came, and it started to drizzle. While waiting for support, I built a small fire to fend off the cold and the forest's gloom. Suddenly, I heard the voices again. The dense trees made it hard to determine where they were coming from. This time, there were multiple voices, seemingly arguing. One voice sounded angry and yelling, while the other seemed scared and trembling. I called out, asking if anyone needed help, but received no reply. I guessed they were within 300 meters of me. Growing more anxious, I radioed my colleagues again, urging them to hurry. They said they were having trouble locating me precisely and would take more time. I suggested asking the colleague who had the tablet with the map, but they responded,
"He hasn't returned yet."
This added to my anxiety. Shortly after, I heard the voices again. Determined to find the source, I followed the direction of the sound. However, the voices seemed to move further away as I approached. After about 20 minutes of this futile chase, I gave up and returned to my fire. Just as I settled down, my walkie-talkie crackled to life. My colleagues reported finding my earlier companion unconscious and covered in vomit, looking like he had experienced something horrifying. They rushed him to the hospital and were now trying to locate me. As I relayed my position, the walkie-talkie went dead, out of battery. The voices returned. This time I listened intently, trying to catch the conversation. I overheard bits like, "That's not yours to take, I don't care," and "Come on, I know you are better than this." The argument grew intense, then fell silent for a few minutes, followed by a gunshot. Immediately, I extinguished my fire and hid in the bushes. Silence enveloped the forest again, broken only by my heavy breathing and, eventually, the sound of approaching vehicles. Hearing my colleagues' off-road vehicles brought immense relief. I left my vehicle and rode back to headquarters with my colleague. There, I recounted everything I had experienced. The next day, we requested police and canine support for another patrol. During the search, we found a shallow grave with a skeletal body, clearly shot in the chest, suggesting the person had been dead for years. This led to 2 theories. Either the gunshot I heard came from elsewhere, or I somehow overheard a crime from the past. The haunting visit. Last summer, I decided to visit my grandmother who lives in a remote countryside area. Along with this visit, I planned to go camping in the nearby forest to enjoy the fresh air. Early in the morning, I set out, eager to take in the beautiful surroundings. The sun was rising, casting golden rays through the trees, creating a picturesque view. The chirping of birds and the gentle sound of the stream made me feel incredibly relaxed and peaceful. After arriving at my grandmother's house, I organized my belongings and prepared for the camping trip the next day. My grandmother, although over 80, was still sharp and cheerful. She shared old stories about the area, which made me even more excited to explore the nearby forest. When I reached the forest in the morning, it was drizzling. The gentle rain falling on the leaves created a cool and pleasant atmosphere. I chose an ideal spot near a small stream and began setting up my tent. The surroundings were lush with green foliage, wildflowers blooming in vibrant colors. The sound of the stream's trickling water, along with distant bird songs, created a serene and tranquil environment. While I was busy, a very friendly local man approached me. He was about 50 years old, wearing old but clean work clothes, and had a smile on his face. "Hello there. I see you're setting up camp here. Where are you from?" he asked. "Hello, I'm from the city. I'm visiting my grandmother and decided to camp out for a night to enjoy the fresh air," I replied. "Oh, so you're camping alone? How long do you plan to stay?" he continued, his eyes seemingly observing very closely. "Yes, I'm camping alone. Just for tonight. I'll be heading back in the morning," I answered, feeling slightly uneasy with his curiosity. "Ah, well, be careful then. This forest doesn't see much traffic. You should stay safe," he said, then bid farewell and left. Despite his friendliness, I felt something was off about him. As night fell, the rain started to pour heavily. The sound of rain hitting the tent, combined with the wind whistling through the leaves, created a mesmerizing natural symphony. I sat in my tent listening to the rain and enjoying the peace of nature. Around 3 a.m., while I was sound asleep, I suddenly heard rustling outside the tent. My heart started pounding, and a chill ran down my spine. I tried to convince myself it was just an animal, but the sound was too deliberate, too human. I lay there, frozen, straining to hear over the drumming rain. Every hair on my body stood on end as the rustling grew louder and more persistent. Fear gripped me, making it hard to move, but I knew I had to act. I quietly reached for my backup gun, my hands trembling as I fumbled with it. The metallic click of the safety being removed seemed unnaturally loud in the silence of the tent. Gathering all my courage, I slowly unzipped the tent, the sound almost drowned out by the storm. My flashlight beam cut through the rain, revealing the man from earlier rummaging through my car. The sight of him sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. "What are you doing here?" I shouted, my voice shaking. He looked up, startled, with a guilty expression. I didn't mean any harm," he stammered, but his actions betrayed his words. In a panic, I fired a shot into the air. The loud bang echoed through the forest, and the man fled into the darkness, disappearing almost instantly. I rushed to check my belongings and found a few items missing. Overwhelmed by fear and adrenaline, I decided to pack up and leave immediately. I didn't want to take any more chances. As I dismantled my tent in the pouring rain, every rustle and creak of the forest sent shivers down my spine. The serene beauty of the forest had turned into a nightmarish landscape filled with unseen threats. On the way back to my grandmother's house, I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. The man's probing eyes and sneaky behavior haunted me. When I returned to my grandmother's house, I recounted the entire incident, and she advised me to report it to the police. The next day, I reported the incident to the local police. They informed me that they had received similar reports about the man and advised me to be more cautious on future trips. The experience of that night still haunts me to this day, serving as a reminder of the hidden dangers in the wild. Although I still love nature and camping, I always ensure my safety and prepare thoroughly for each trip since then. Driving through the rainforest. It was a torrentially rainy night after a long day away from home to watch my favorite basketball team's game. I felt elated and excited as my team had won. On the way back home, I had to drive through a dense forest. The rain poured heavily, the sound of raindrops pounding on the car roof and the wind whistling through the cracks created a chilling soundtrack. The car's headlights barely pierced through the thick rain, and everything around me was pitch dark. As I was driving, suddenly my car came to an abrupt stop. I tried restarting the engine multiple times, but it wouldn't respond. The rain kept pouring harder, the sound of it hit the car growing louder. My heart pounded, realizing I was stranded in the middle of the forest in a heavy rainstorm. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside, hoping to find out what was wrong with the car. The cold rain soaked through my clothes, and every step on the muddy ground made me feel more disheartened. I opened the hood but saw nothing unusual. While I was fumbling around, I heard a strange noise in the distance, like soft footsteps on the dry leaves. I tried to calm myself, convincing myself it was just a small animal. Back inside the car, I decided to use my phone to call for help, but to my horror, my phone had no signal. I began to feel increasingly panicked and utterly alone. Outside, the sound of rain and the wind howling through the trees added to the eerie silence. Sitting in the car, I remembered the stories about this forest, about people who had mysteriously disappeared. I tried not to let my imagination run wild, but I couldn't stop the fear from rising within me. Suddenly, I saw a flickering light deep in the forest, like the beam of a flashlight. I felt a mix of relief and fear, unsure whether it was a person or something else. I decided to check out the light. Grabbing my flashlight, I stepped out of the car and headed toward the light. The rain kept pouring heavily, and each step made me feel colder. The light seemed to move as if it was leading me deeper into the forest. My heart raced, but curiosity and the hope of finding someone to help drove me forward. As I got closer, the light suddenly went out. I looked around, trying to adjust my flashlight to find the source of the light. Suddenly, I felt a chilling presence right behind me. Turning around, I saw a large, dark figure with glowing red eyes staring at me. In that moment, fear engulfed me, and I couldn't move. The figure moved closer, and I realized it wasn't human. It was tall and gaunt, with long, sharp claws. Its breath was cold, and I could feel the danger emanating from this creature. I knew I had to run, but my legs felt frozen in place. Suddenly, the creature let out a terrifying roar, shaking the entire forest. That roar snapped me out of my nightmare, and I quickly turned and ran as fast as I could. The creature's footsteps followed, getting closer. I tried not to look back, focusing on running towards the car. When I was near the car, I slipped and fell to the ground, the flashlight flying out of my hand. In the darkness, I saw the creature approaching. With the last bit of strength, I crawled to the car, opened the door, and jumped inside. I locked the doors and tried to start the engine. Miraculously, the car started. I quickly hit the gas and sped away, leaving the terrifying creature behind. As I drove out of the forest and felt safer, I looked back through the rearview mirror. There, in the middle of the road, stood a large black bear with glowing red eyes, still watching the car. I realized that the terrifying creature was just a black bear, but in the darkness and the pouring rain, it had become my worst nightmare. Sitting in the car, my heart was still pounding, and the fear remained. I knew I had just experienced something horrifying and unexplainable. The memory of that night still haunts me. Whenever it rains, I remember being stranded in the forest and the encounter with the mysterious black bear. Even after many years, that story remains a reminder of the hidden dangers in the wild and the mysteries we may never fully understand.
The Watchful Eyes. It was a light, rainy day, much like the soothing background of a lo-fi track, perfect for a camping trip in the forest. The rain fell softly on the leaves, the cool, damp air filled the surroundings, and the earthy scent of wet soil was incredibly refreshing. I, Emily, a 17-year-old girl who is strong and loves wild mountain climbing activities, decided to challenge myself by going camping alone in the forest. This forest is located a few hours' drive from my home, known for its pristine and tranquil scenery. When I arrived, I took a deep breath of the fresh air, listening to the gentle patter of rain on the foliage, my heart filled with excitement. I found an ideal spot near a small stream and began setting up my tent. The lush green trees, wildflowers blooming in a myriad of colors, painted a beautiful natural picture. The babbling of the stream, combined with the chirping of birds, made me feel relaxed and peaceful. While I was busy setting up the tent, a strange feeling suddenly swept over me. I stopped, listening intently, but all I heard was the rain and the wind. I reassured myself it was just my imagination and continued my work. However, the feeling of being watched lingered in my mind. Occasionally, I heard the rustling of leaves and the snapping of twigs, but when I looked around, I saw no one. The afternoon gradually turned into evening. I lit a fire and prepared dinner. The crackling flames provided warmth amidst the cold rain. I tried to relax, convincing myself I was just overly anxious. But as night fell, the sense of unease grew stronger. I listened to every tiny sound, trying to discern if someone was around. As night fell, the rain began to pour heavily. The sound of rain hitting the tent, combined with the wind whistling through the leaves, created an enchanting natural symphony. I sat inside my tent, listening to the rain and feeling the tranquility of nature. Around midnight, when I was fast asleep in my tent, a sudden noise outside jolted me awake. My heart pounded violently, and I lay still, listening intently. The soft rustling of footsteps on dry leaves and distant whispers made my spine tingle. In the darkness, all my senses became heightened, and every small sound made me jump. Each noise seemed like a reminder of my loneliness and helplessness deep in the forest. I could feel cold sweat trickling down my spine, my hand trembling as it gripped the thin blanket. I tried to reassure myself that it was just the sounds of nature, but the fear crept into my mind. The footsteps stopped and then continued, closer and clearer. I felt as though someone was standing right outside my tent, observing my every breath. My heart filled with terror, but I dared not move, dared not make a sound. The feeling of being trapped and having no escape froze me in fear. The rain continued to pour, the footsteps still circled around the tent, and my fear kept growing. At that moment, I felt the fragility of life and understood that sometimes the peace of nature could turn into the most terrifying nightmare. Then the sound of the tent zipper being pulled open echoed, each sound chilling me to the bone. I gripped the knife tightly, ready to defend myself. As the flashlight beam illuminated the tent, I clearly saw the face of the stranger. His eyes shone in the dark, full of menace. He moved closer to me, and I could feel his heavy breathing. I knew I couldn't just lie there waiting. With all my strength, I kicked him hard, causing him to stagger. Taking advantage of the moment, I bolted out of the tent and ran frantically through the dark forest. The sound of rain and his footsteps chasing me made my fear even more intense. In the dim light of the flashlight, I tried to find a way out of the forest, but the slippery and rugged terrain caused me to stumble repeatedly. Each time I fell, I got up and continued running, not daring to stop for even a second. His footsteps grew louder, and my heart was filled with dread. Finally, I saw the faint light of a small wooden cabin. I ran towards it, banging on the door for help. "Please, is anyone there? Help me!" I screamed in desperation. Fortunately, the homeowner was an elderly man. He opened the door and pulled me inside, looking at me with concern. "What happened?" he asked. He was chasing me," I said between gasps, trying to calm down. The man closed and locked the door, then looked out the window. "He's gone. You're safe now." I sat down, my body still trembling with fear. He brought me a glass of water and a warm blanket. "Do you want to call the police?" he asked. "Yes, I need to report this," I replied, still scared but feeling safer with someone around. The next day, I returned home safely and reported the incident to the police. They investigated and discovered that the man was a fugitive hiding in the forest. That terrifying night still haunts me to this day. It serves as a reminder that danger always lurks in the wild. Nevertheless, my love for nature and camping remains undiminished. I continue to explore, but always ensure my safety and prepare more thoroughly for each trip.
Fishing deep in the forest. One rainy day, I decided to go fishing deep in the forest, seeking out rare fish that few have the chance to see. As a passionate fisherman and nature explorer, I often spend time in remote places, far from the hustle and bustle of urban life. With my backpack full of fishing gear and some provisions, I began my journey into the woods. The initial scenery was peaceful. The rain pattered softly on the leaves, The air was fresh and cool. I ventured deep into the forest, crossing small streams and wet grassy patches. After a few hours of hiking, I found a small lake where I believed I might find some rare fish. I set up my tent and began preparing my fishing gear. The afternoon passed in tranquility. I caught a few small fish, but nothing special. As night fell, I decided to rest up for the next day's fishing. The rain continued to drizzle, making the dense forest even more eerie and ominous. Sitting by a small campfire, I listened to the sounds of insects and nocturnal animals, feeling close to nature. Suddenly, I heard heavy footsteps in the distance. My heart raced. I extinguished the fire and listened intently. The footsteps drew closer, and I realized they weren't from an animal. A group of people emerged from the darkness carrying weapons and dim flashlights. I immediately knew they were poachers. I tried to stay calm, but they spotted me. One of them shouted, and I knew I had to run. I dashed into the forest, the sound of shouting and footsteps close behind. My heart pounded wildly. Each step felt like it sank into the soft ground, the rain still pouring, making the terrain even more slippery. In a state of panic, I slipped and fell, my flashlight tumbling out of my hand and rolling down a slope. I scrambled to my feet, desperately trying to find a way to escape in the pitch black. The shouts and footsteps were getting closer by the second. Knowing I couldn't run forever, I decided to find a hiding spot. I saw a large hollow tree and dived into it, trying to stay silent. My heart was pounding, sweat and rain mingled, soaking me through. I could hear the poachers walking by, searching the area. They spoke in rough and angry tones. After a while, they moved on, but I remained still, not daring to move. When I was sure they had gone far away, I crawled out of the hollow tree and quietly made my way back. After hours of walking in the rain, I finally emerged from the forest and returned to town safely. I immediately reported the incident to the police, providing every detail about the poachers I had encountered. The police acted swiftly, and a few days later, they informed me that the poachers had been arrested. I felt relieved and proud that I had helped protect nature. The memory of that horrifying night still haunts me, but it also serves as a reminder of the dangers lurking in the wild. That story is an experience I will never forget, a warning to all nature enthusiasts about the importance of caution and thorough preparation before each trip.
Lost in the woods. That rainy day, we began our camping trip in the middle of the forest, a peaceful and pristine place. My close friends and I decided to spend a weekend away from the city's hustle and bustle, seeking nature to relax and reconnect. The morning drizzle, fresh air, and earthy scent permeated the surroundings, making us feel calm and excited. We set up camp near a small stream where the dense foliage and the sound of flowing water created a soothing melody. The afternoon passed peacefully. We grilled meat, chatted, and laughed under the canopy of trees. But as night fell, dark clouds gathered, and heavy rain started to pour. As night descended, we decided to go to bed early. Around midnight, I realized I had left my phone in the car, about 300 meters away from the tent. I needed my phone to check the weather, as the rain was getting heavier. I decided to go out and get the phone, taking the backup flashlight with me. However, as soon as I stepped out of the tent, a strong gust of wind blew out the light. I rummaged for another flashlight in my bag, but it didn't work either. At this point, I began to feel anxious. I tried to find my way back to the tent, but the weak light from the faulty flashlight was not enough to illuminate the path. Darkness enveloped me, and strange noises from the dense forest began to echo, making me feel scared. I called out my friends' names, but the sound of rain and wind drowned out my voice. A sense of loneliness and helplessness started to creep in. As I wandered aimlessly in the woods, I heard a loud noise behind me. Turning around, I was horrified to see a large bear approaching. My heart pounded, and I didn't know what to do except stand still. The bear stared at me, then suddenly charged. In that moment, everything seemed to slow down. I felt each raindrop on my face and my quick, shallow breaths. I ran as fast as I could, but the slippery ground caused me to fall. The bear drew closer, and I felt my end was near. But suddenly, a gunshot rang out from a distance, and the bear stopped. It lifted its head, listening, then turned and ran back into the forest. I looked up and saw my friends with flashlights and spotlights, They had heard my scream and came running to help. We hurried back to the tent, my limbs trembling and my heart filled with fear. Once safely inside, I recounted the encounter with the bear. We decided to dismantle the camp immediately and head home. On the way back, I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. The initial tranquility of the forest had been replaced by sheer terror. The memory of that night still haunts me. Whenever it rains, I remember being lost in the woods and the frightening encounter with the bear. Even after many years, that story remains a reminder of the hidden dangers in the wild.
The Horrifying Survival Challenge, 7 days in the deep forest. My name is Mike, a YouTuber specializing in survival challenges. With over 500,000 followers, I'm always seeking new and exciting experiences to share with my audience. This time, I decided to undertake a challenge I've long dreamed of: surviving alone in a primeval forest in Asia for 7 days. I arrived at the forest on a rainy morning. The rain was pouring down, and the heavy raindrops hit my face, but I felt only excitement. It was a pristine forest, rarely trodden by humans, and I knew I would have to rely on myself to survive. I set up my tent under a dense canopy, hoping it would provide some shelter from the rain. Once everything was ready, I turned on the camera and began recording the first scenes of my journey. The first day passed relatively smoothly. I collected rainwater to drink and struggled to start a fire with the soaked branches. It was harder than I expected, but after many attempts, I succeeded. I began foraging for food, mainly edible wild fruits and insects. It wasn't a feast, but it was enough to keep me going. However, by the third day, things took a turn for the worse. The heavy rain continued unabated, making everything slippery and dangerous. While searching for more firewood, I suddenly slipped on a rock. A sharp pain shot through my left leg as I fell. I tried to stand up but couldn't. My leg couldn't bear my weight. The excruciating pain signaled that I had broken my leg. Panic began to set in. I dragged my painful body back to the tent. The heavy rain made everything more difficult, and the rushing water disoriented me. After many hours of struggle, I finally reached the tent, but the pain in my leg nearly exhausted me. I tried to make a splint from tree branches to stabilize my leg, but the pain did not subside. On the fourth day, I felt utterly hopeless. With no phone signal, I couldn't call anyone for help. I realized I would have to find a way to survive until someone found me. My food supply was running low, and finding more food was extremely challenging with a broken leg. The rainwater wasn't clean enough to drink without boiling, and keeping the fire going became increasingly difficult as the rain intensified. I began recording a video diary each day, both to keep my spirits up and to ensure my audience could understand my situation if I didn't make it back. I felt my body weakening, and my hope of being rescued was fading. On the fifth day, the situation became dire. I started to feel my body deteriorating due to a lack of water and food. Amidst the pain and exhaustion, I saw something glistening under the rare sunlight breaking through the canopy. It was a water pipe leading from a nearby village. I realized this might be my only chance to be rescued. With what little strength I had left, I dragged myself towards the water pipe. After many hours of effort, I finally reached the pipe. I used a small knife to cut the pipe, hoping this would alert the villagers to come and check. On the seventh day, I was nearly out of hope. The pain in my leg was relentless, and I no longer had the strength to move. However, in the afternoon, I heard footsteps and voices from afar. It was the villagers coming to check the water pipe. When they found me, I was exhausted and nearly unconscious. The villagers helped me return to safety. I was taken to the hospital and given proper care. My broken leg was treated, and I gradually recovered. This horrifying survival story became a valuable lesson, not just about perseverance and determination, but also about the fragility of human life against the forces of nature. Despite the harrowing days I went through, this experience changed me forever. I returned to that forest after recovering, this time with better preparation and a deep respect for nature. The lessons from this challenge helped me grow and better understand the value of life.
Survival in the rain. It was a stormy night, and my friends, Jack, Olivia, Michael, and I were camping deep in the forest. We had planned this trip for months, eager to escape the hustle and bustle of city life and reconnect with nature. The forest was dense and remote, its towering trees forming a dark canopy above us. As we set up our tents, the weather took a turn for the worse. Heavy rain began to pour, turning the ground into a muddy mess. We huddled around our campfire, trying to keep it alive despite the relentless downpour. The cozy atmosphere we had hoped for was overshadowed by the sound of thunder and the eerie darkness surrounding us. Suddenly, a blood-curdling roar pierced through the noise of the storm. We all froze, eyes wide with fear. It was a sound unlike anything I had ever heard before, deep, guttural, and terrifying. We exchanged nervous glances, each of us silently wondering what kind of creature could make such a noise. Before we could react, a massive, shadowy figure emerged from the darkness. It was a beast, unlike anything I had ever seen, a monstrous creature with glowing eyes and sharp claws. Panic surged through me as the beast charged at us with incredible speed. "Run!" I shouted, and we scattered in different directions, abandoning our campsite. The rain made it difficult to see and even harder to move quickly. I could hear the others screaming, but the sound was quickly drowned out by the storm and the beast's roars. I ran as fast as I could, my heart pounding in my chest. I could feel the beast's presence behind me, its hot breath on my neck. I stumbled over roots and rocks, desperately trying to put distance between myself and the creature. Finally, I found a large tree with a hollow at its base. I dove inside, pressing myself against the damp, muddy ground. I held my breath, listening intently for any signs of the beast. The rain pounded against the leaves above, and the thunder continued to rumble, but I could still hear the beast's heavy footsteps nearby. My heart was racing, and I struggled to stay calm. I knew that my survival depended on remaining silent and hidden. Minutes felt like hours as I lay there, waiting for the beast to move on. I could hear it sniffing around, its growls sending shivers down my spine. I prayed that my friends had found safe hiding places as well. The thought of them being caught by the creature was too horrifying to bear. Eventually, the footsteps grew fainter, and the growls faded into the distance. I waited a while longer, just to be sure it was safe, before cautiously crawling out of my hiding spot. The rain had lessened, but the forest was still dark and foreboding. I made my way back to the campsite, hoping to find my friends. The scene was chaotic. Our tents were torn apart and our belongings scattered. I called out softly, not wanting to attract the beast's attention if it was still nearby. "Jack? Olivia? Michael?" I whispered, my voice trembling. To my immense relief, I heard a response. "Over here," Jack called out weakly. I followed the sound and found him huddled behind a fallen tree, covered in mud and bruises. Olivia and Michael were with him, both looking equally shaken, but thankfully unharmed. "We need to get out of here," Michael said, his voice urgent. "That thing could come back at any moment." We gathered what little we could salvage and set off, trying to find our way back to the main road. The journey was grueling, every rustle and snap of a twig sending us into a state of high alert. The fear of the beast returning kept us moving, despite our exhaustion and injuries. Hours later, we finally stumbled out of the forest and onto the road. A passing car stopped to help us, and we were able to call for assistance. The terror of that night would stay with us forever, a grim reminder of the dangers that lurk in the deep, dark woods. We never discovered what kind of creature had attacked us, and none of us were eager to return to find out. The forest, once a place of adventure and tranquility, had become a place of nightmares.
Chase in the storm. It was a violent, stormy day. My three close friends, Jack, Olivia, Michael, and I decided to go camping deep in the forest to enjoy a weekend getaway. We had planned this trip for months, eagerly anticipating new and exciting experiences. The dense forest with towering trees formed a dark canopy above, creating a wild and mysterious atmosphere. As we set up camp, the weather started to worsen. Heavy rain began to pour, turning the ground into a muddy mess. The wind howled through the trees, creating eerie sounds. but we remained optimistic, lighting a campfire and sitting around it together. Suddenly, amidst the rain and wind, we heard heavy footsteps approaching. Initially, we thought it was just the sound of the wind or forest animals, but the footsteps grew louder and closer. We stopped talking and looked at each other with concern. In the dim light of the campfire, a man appeared. He was tall, with disheveled hair and a wild look in his eyes. He shouted that we had trespassed on his territory and would have to pay the price. Before we could react, he charged at us. Jack was the first to be attacked. The man used a large branch to strike Jack, causing him to fall to the ground. We screamed in horror and started to run. I grabbed Olivia and Michael, pulling them deeper into the forest. The man's shouts and the sound of his footsteps followed us, drowning out the rain. We ran through the slippery trails, desperately trying to escape the attacker. I felt the panic in every heartbeat and every breath. The rain made everything more difficult, but we didn't stop. We knew that if we stopped, we might never have a chance to survive. As we ran through a dense thicket, we decided to split up to confuse him. I held Olivia's hand and instructed her to run in a different direction. Michael and I continued running towards the river, hoping to escape by following the water. We heard the man's shouts coming from behind. I glanced back and saw him chasing Michael. Michael tried to run faster, but the man was too strong and fast. In a moment of terror, I saw the man tackle Michael to the ground. I felt helpless and terrified, but I knew I had to keep going. I led Olivia to a small cave by the river and we hid inside. We sat huddled together, shivering from the cold and fear. The sound of the rain and wind created a haunting symphony. We tried to stay quiet, praying that the attacker wouldn't find us. After what felt like an eternity, the sound of his footsteps and shouts faded away. We knew we had escaped his pursuit, but the fear and the memory of the attack would haunt us forever. We needed to find a way to contact the authorities and get Jack and Michael to safety. The next morning, when the storm had lessened, we left the cave and searched for help. We encountered a ranger and told him everything that had happened. He quickly called the police and helped us get out of the forest. When the police arrived, they searched the area and found Jack and Michael, both shaken but alive. The attacker was also found and arrested. It turned out that he had been living alone in the forest for many years and considered it his own territory. Back home, we held a gathering to celebrate our survival and to thank each other for the bravery and quick thinking that helped us escape. The fear and the trauma of that night still lingered, but we knew we were incredibly lucky to have survived such a dangerous ordeal. From that day forward, we promised to always be more cautious and vigilant whenever we were outdoors, especially during stormy weather. Survival in the open sea. It was a stormy day. I was piloting my private boat on the open sea, enjoying the solo trip I had been looking forward to for a long time. The sky was initially clear, but soon dark clouds gathered and the wind began to pick up. Before I realized it, a violent storm had struck, turning the sea into a chaotic whirlwind. Huge waves battered the boat, causing it to sway violently. I tried to steer the boat to keep it stable, but the wind and waves were too strong, beyond my control. The sound of the wind howling and the waves crashing against the hull created a terrifying noise, drowning out my screams. Then, a gigantic wave hit the boat, causing it to capsize. I was thrown out of the cabin, falling into the icy sea. The salty water filled my mouth and nose, making me choke. I struggled to swim to the surface, but the relentless waves kept pushing me down. After a moment of struggle, I finally surfaced, gasping for air as the waves continued to pummel my body. I looked around, searching for anything to hold on to. My boat had been swept away by the waves, leaving only debris floating around. I felt like a tiny grain of sand in the vast and raging ocean. With no other choice, I swam towards a large piece of debris from the boat, hoping it would help me stay afloat and rest for a bit. The storm continued, with the wind and waves growing even stronger. I clung to the debris, trying to keep my head above water. Every minute felt like an hour, and exhaustion began to weigh heavily on my body. In my desperation, I suddenly remembered that I had a waterproof flashlight in my jacket pocket. I fumbled for it and luckily found it. I knew this might be my only chance to attract the attention of any nearby ships. I turned on the flashlight and began signaling SOS. 3 short flashes, 3 long flashes, 3 short flashes. I kept flashing the light, hoping that someone would see my signal amidst the dark storm. Hope surged within me, but I also worried if anyone would see me before the storm swept me further away. Suddenly, I saw a faint light in the distance. It was the light from a large ship. I continued flashing the SOS signal persistently. The light from the ship gradually drew closer. I could hear the sound of the ship's engine and see the figures of people looking down. Finally, they had seen me. A rope was lowered, and I grabbed onto it with all the strength I had left. Strong hands pulled me up, lifting me out of the perilous sea. When I was pulled onto the deck, exhaustion and emotion overwhelmed me, and I burst into tears. The people on the ship gave me a warm blanket and helped me calm down. I felt grateful to be rescued and realized how lucky I was to escape the nightmare in the open sea. That night, lying in the warm cabin of the rescue ship, I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. The sea is a formidable and ruthless force, but I had fought and survived. I knew I would never forget this harrowing experience, and from then on, I would always cherish every moment of life.
The Rainy Day Stalker. It was one of those dreary, relentless rainy days. The sky was a dull gray, and the rain poured down as if it would never stop. I decided to go to the mall to escape the gloomy feeling. The idea of wandering through brightly lit stores amidst the hustle and bustle of shoppers seemed like a perfect escape from the dreary weather outside. I grabbed my umbrella and headed out, trying to avoid puddles and heavy traffic. By the time I reached the mall, I was soaked despite my efforts. The warm air inside was a stark contrast to the cold rain outside, and I felt a sense of relief as I stepped into the bustling atrium. I spent the first hour drifting from store to store, enjoying the anonymity that comes with being surrounded by strangers. I bought a few items, some clothes, a book, and a new pair of shoes. My mood lifted as I indulged in some retail therapy and the lively atmosphere. However, as I stepped out of a store, I suddenly noticed a pair of eyes watching me. A man stood on the other side of the corridor, his gaze fixed on me. I shivered, trying to convince myself that it was just a coincidence. I continued walking, deliberately weaving in and out of different stores to see if he would keep following me. But every time I glanced around, he was still there, maintaining his distance, but never taking his eyes off me. My heart began to race, and fear crept in with each passing minute. Finally, I decided to try a different tactic. I walked into a small cafe, sat down, and ordered a hot cup of tea. I chose a seat near the window where I could see the corridor outside. A few minutes later, the man entered the cafe. He sat down at a table not far from me, continuing to stare. Unable to take it any longer, I stood up and left the cafe. I quickened my pace, hoping to lose him in the crowd. But no matter how fast I walked, I still felt his eyes boring into my back. I turned into a quieter corridor, hoping to find an exit. But then I heard footsteps behind me. Quick, urgent footsteps, as if he were chasing me. Panic set in, and I tried to run, but my legs felt like they were made of lead. I ducked into a hidden corner, hiding behind a large column, panting and listening. The footsteps stopped right nearby. I could hear his breathing, clear and distinct in the stillness. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it would explode. I closed my eyes, praying he wouldn't find me. Suddenly, a hand grabbed my shoulder. I gasped and turned around to see him standing there, his face cold and expressionless. "Did you think you could escape?" he said in a deep, menacing voice. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out. I felt paralyzed, unable to move or call for help. He pulled me out of the hiding spot, dragging me into a dark, empty corridor. "I've been watching you for a long time," he whispered. "You can't get away." Fear engulfed me, but in that moment, a thought flashed through my mind. I couldn't let him control me. I had to do something, anything, to escape this situation. With all the strength I had left, I wrenched myself free from his grip and ran towards the light at the end of the corridor. I heard him chasing after me, but I didn't dare look back. I ran and ran until I saw a security guard patrolling. I rushed to him, crying for help and recounting the whole story. The security guard quickly called the police, but by the time they arrived, The man had vanished without a trace. They searched the mall, but no one could find him. I was taken home safely, but my mind remained filled with fear and unease. Questions swirled in my head. Who was he? Why was he following me? And would I ever truly be free of him? In the days that followed, I lived in anxiety and vigilance, always feeling like a pair of eyes were watching me from the shadows. My story wasn't over, and perhaps it would never have an answer. But from that day on, I realized that sometimes the worst fears don't come from faraway places, but from the most ordinary moments in life. The Rainy Day Stalker, Part 2. In the days that followed, I tried to return to a normal life, but the feeling of being watched never left my mind. I avoided going out alone, especially at night or when it was raining. Every time I stepped out of the house, I would check my surroundings, looking for any signs of that strange man. I began to notice odd things. Every time I went to the market or my usual coffee shop, I felt like someone was watching me from a distance. Occasionally, I would catch a glimpse of a familiar figure in the crowd, but whenever I tried to get closer, he would disappear. I wasn't sure if I was paranoid or truly being followed, but the fear remained palpable. One night, when I was home alone, the rain was pouring heavily. I sat in the living room, trying to read a book to distract myself from my worries, but the constant sound of rain made me uneasy. Suddenly, I heard a faint noise outside the window. My heart raced as I slowly approached the window to check. Outside, under the dim streetlight, I saw a shadow pass by. I stepped back, panic starting to set in. I closed the window and drew the curtains, trying to convince myself it was just a tree branch or a stray cat. But then there was a knock on the door. I stood frozen, afraid to move. The knocking was steady and persistent, as if the person outside knew I was home. I grabbed my phone, trembling, and called the police. "Hello, I need help. Someone is knocking on my door, and I'm very scared," I said, my voice shaking. The police reassured me that they would come right away and told me to stay inside and not open the door for anyone. I sat down on the chair, trying to stay calm. The knocking continued, steady and unrelenting. After a while, I heard the distant sound of police sirens. The knocking stopped abruptly, and I heard hurried footsteps moving away. I ran to the window and saw the police lights illuminating the street. But the man had disappeared, like a ghost in the rainy night. The police checked around my house but found no trace of him. They advised me to install a security camera system and keep my doors securely locked. I thanked them and went back inside, but the sense of security had completely vanished. I lived in fear, always feeling like someone was watching me from the shadows. On rainy nights, I couldn't sleep, afraid the knocking would start again. The questions about his identity and purpose remained unanswered. One morning, I received a letter with no sender, just my address. The letter contained a single short sentence: "I will return." My hands trembled as I read the words, fear engulfing me. I didn't know when or how he would come back, but I knew my life would never be the same again. Conclusion. I knew that I couldn't live in fear forever. I had to find a way to end this nightmare. I decided to use my intelligence to trap and get the man arrested. I began to make a plan. First, I installed a security camera system around my house to monitor any movements. I also connected the system to my phone so I could watch live feeds at any time. Next, I bought a strong flashlight and a can of pepper spray in case I needed to defend myself. I asked my close friends for help. They would stay nearby when I needed them, and we planned to pretend that I was home alone to lure the man into action. I knew that if I created an opportunity for him to attack, he would reveal himself and we could catch him. One rainy night, I prepared carefully. I turned on the security cameras, placed my phone beside me, and kept the flashlight and pepper spray within reach. I left the lights on in the house, pretending to be going about my usual activities. But in reality, my friends were hiding in the next room, ready to respond. Around midnight, the knocking on the door began. My heart raced, but I tried to stay calm. I checked the camera and saw the silhouette of the man standing at the door. I texted my friends, telling them to get ready. I walked to the door, holding the pepper spray and flashlight. Taking a deep breath, I cracked the door open and asked, "Who's there?" "I will return," the man replied, his voice cold and menacing. I opened the door a little wider, enough to see his face clearly in the beam of the flashlight. "What do you want?" I asked, trying to sound frightened to lower his guard. The man didn't answer, just took a step closer. I immediately turned on the flashlight, shining it directly into his eyes, and sprayed the pepper spray into his face. He screamed in pain and stumbled back, but it was too late. My friends rushed out, subduing him and holding him down until the police arrived. The police came and arrested the man. They found plenty of evidence that he had been stalking and harassing me for a long time. He was taken away and held accountable by the law. I returned home, feeling more relieved and safer than ever before. My life began to return to normal, but I always remembered the valuable lesson from this ordeal. Intelligence and courage can help us overcome the greatest fears. The rainy days continued, but now I no longer felt afraid. I knew that, no matter what happened, I could always find a way to protect myself and overcome any challenge. My story, in the end, had a happy conclusion.
Lost in the woods. On a stormy evening, my 3 close friends, Jack, Olivia, and Michael, and I decided to go camping for the weekend in the dense, remote forests of the Pacific Northwest. We had been looking forward to this trip for months, craving a break from our busy lives. The forest was thick with towering trees, their branches forming a dark canopy overhead. As we set up camp, the weather took a turn for the worse. Heavy rain began to pour, turning the ground into a slick, muddy mess. We huddled in our tents trying to stay dry and warm, but soon we realized that the rain wasn't our only problem. The path we had followed into the woods was now a muddy, unrecognizable trail, and we found ourselves disoriented and lost. Panic set in as the hours passed. With night falling and the rain showing no signs of letting up, we decided to stick together and find our way back to the main road. We gathered our belongings and ventured out into the dark, rain-soaked forest, relying on the dim light of our flashlights to guide us. After several hours of wandering, we stumbled upon an old, abandoned cabin. It seemed like a safe place to take shelter and regroup. We huddled inside, lighting a small fire to dry off and warm up. The cabin was decrepit, with broken windows and a rotting roof, but it provided some relief from the relentless rain. As we settled in, we heard a noise outside. At first, we thought it was just the wind or an animal, but the sound grew louder and more distinct, a steady, rhythmic crunching of footsteps on wet leaves. I peered out of a cracked window and saw a shadowy figure standing just at the edge of the clearing, barely visible in the downpour. Fear gripped me as I whispered to the others. We cautiously approached the window, trying to get a better look. The figure stood motionless for what felt like an eternity, then suddenly began to move toward the cabin. Our hearts raced as we scrambled to find something to defend ourselves with. Michael grabbed an old, rusty axe from a corner, while Olivia clutched a heavy piece of wood. The door creaked open, and the figure stepped inside. It was a man, his face obscured by a hood, drenched from the rain. He said nothing, just stood there, staring at us with a chilling intensity. We demanded to know what he wanted, but he remained silent, his eyes never leaving us. In a desperate bid to escape, Jack lunged at the man with the axe, but the stranger was quick and strong. He overpowered Jack with ease, throwing him to the ground. We watched in horror, paralyzed by fear. The man then turned his gaze to me, and I felt a cold dread settle over me. Suddenly, without warning, the man spoke in a low, gravely voice. "You shouldn't have come here." Before we could react, the man lunged at me, but I managed to dodge and run out of the cabin. The others followed, adrenaline fueling our desperate flight through the dark, rain-soaked forest. We ran blindly, branches whipping at our faces, the man's footsteps pounding behind us. Hours passed as we ran and stumbled through the forest. The rain finally began to let up, and the first light of dawn broke through the trees. Exhausted and terrified, we burst out onto a road where a passing car stopped to help us. We were safe, but the terror of that night would haunt us forever. To this day, none of us know who the man was or why he chased us. The only thing we are certain of is that we will never return to those woods again.
Thank you to all the viewers who watched until the end of the video. This is Rainy Diaries, a channel where real horror stories are shared under the rain. See you in tomorrow's video.